Been more explosions in the Lebanese capital, hours after the Israeli army issued an evacuation order for dozens of areas in the city. In these pictures from the last couple of hours, you can see plumes of smoke rising over southern Beirut. Another Israeli strike hit a Palestinian refugee camp in the northern port of Tripoli. Hamas has reportedly said that Saeed Attallah, a leader of the group's armed wing, was killed along with 3 members of his family. This is the scene live now in Beirut as airstrikes continue. Lebanese authorities say 4 hospitals are now out of action, and the United Nations has warned that all 900 shelters for displaced people are now full. Will Vernon reports.
Lebanon's capital pummeled by explosions yet again. This was the scene overnight. 1 week on since the leader of Hezbollah was killed, this conflict is escalating. And the suffering of the Lebanese people is intensifying. The United Nations says that most of the 900 shelters that have appeared across the country are now full. Hundreds of men, women and children are forced to sleep in the open.
The toll on civilians from this campaign is totally unacceptable. All parties must do whatever they can at all times to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure and ensure that civilians are never put in harm's way.
And tension is mounting over how Israel will respond to this. Last week, Iran fired around 200 ballistic missiles at its enemy. Most were shot down. But America is concerned that Israel's retaliation could open up a dangerous new front in this war. President Biden last night suggested strikes against Iranian oil facilities were not the solution.
The Israelis have not concluded what they're going to do in terms of a strike. That's under discussion. I think if I were in their shoes, I'd be thinking about other alternatives than striking oil fields.
On Israel's northern border with Lebanon, the sounds of war are never far. For those that remain, the fear is constant.
It's more than afraid. Afraid is something for just a few minutes. We have 1 year of afraid. Fear for a long time, and they don't know when, how it will finish.
And more UK nationals have been evacuated on special flights organised by the British government. Another plane is scheduled to leave Beirut tomorrow. Israel says its offensive in Lebanon will continue until Hezbollah no longer poses a threat. For the civilians caught in the middle, the agony of war drags on. Will Vernon, BBC News.
Well, as we've been hearing, there have been multiple strikes overnight and into this morning. Let's have a look at a map showing where the strikes are across the region up until Friday night. Attacks by Israel are shown in red on this map, and those by Hezbollah, rockets fired into northern Israel, are in purple. Israel has ordered residents in these southern Lebanese communities, it's around 30 villages here marked in orange, to leave their homes for their own safety. The BBC's Lena Sinjab is in Beirut with the latest on those strikes.
Becoming a pattern of overnight airstrikes, especially against Dahieh neighborhood in the south of Beirut. That is a Hezbollah stronghold, and that's exactly what happened overnight. We haven't heard, a clarification on who has been the target in these attacks overnight, but also we've heard reports of attacks in Tripoli, in northern of Lebanon, the city of Tripoli, where one neighborhood in a building block it was attacked. A specific apartment was attacked, and it's said to be one of the leaders of Hamas's military wing that has been assassinated. In the south, more and more strikes happened in southern cities, but also there are warnings of evacuation for hospitals. We hear reports that at least 9 paramedics in the south have been, injured because of attacks. So it seems that Israel is expanding more and more its operations, not to be specified in certain locations and certain areas. Now, new cities are entering this kind of campaign of assassination and attacks. And really, people here in Lebanon, especially here in Beirut, they feel that The attack could be in their house or in the house next to them any minute, at any time, especially because the drones are flying over, hovering over the city day and night, warning that there would be an imminent attack any minute.
It must be so difficult for people to decide where to go, where they think might be safe. You talk about these evacuation orders. Where are people going?
Well, we've seen over the past 2 weeks an exodus of people fleeing southern Lebanon, coming up north to, northern cities, or even here to Beirut. 900 shelters, are almost full with people. Any empty buildings, is full with people. Some people are even going further up to the mountains to find, escape and shelter. Those who have money are paying, apartments or staying in hotel blocks. But, the need is immense, and people are still on the run every single day. We've seen even the border crossing with Syria has been targeted. Some 300,000 people have fled over this border crossing in the past week. That includes both Lebanese and Syrians who've already fled from the war in Syria into Lebanon. Now they're making the journey back into Syria. So, people feel that they are being enclosed within a war zone, and there is no way for them to escape. Now, of course, we have the airport that is still functioning and operating and helping many who are able to travel, whether international or Lebanese who hold dual passports or has visas to be able to travel somewhere, is still operating. But you cannot imagine the feeling here among the Lebanese, especially here in Beirut and in cities in the south that are affected directly by the war, that any minute their life could be at stake.
Lina Sinjab reporting there from Beirut. Well, our correspondent Nick Beek is in northern Israel near the border with Lebanon. I asked him what's known about a potential Israeli attack on Iran.
I think it's significant that the Jewish New Year holiday is now ended. There was a wide expectation that there wouldn't be any sort of response during those hours where normally families would be celebrating. Clearly it took a different mood this year. In the absence of any direct action from the Israelis, we have had the vacuum filled, particularly from what's been coming out of the United States. If you think about it, President Biden was asked, first of all, would he support any sort of strike on Iran's nuclear sites, to which he said he didn't want to see that. Then there was the suggestion that he was in conversations about any sort of reprisals or attacks that would hit the oil industry. But the latest we hear from President Biden is that he would discourage against that. I think it's really hard to work out from all that's happened over the past few days when exactly the Israelis will strike and what they will look to target. But clearly they've been planning this, and it may well be that, as I say, now the holiday's over here, that the action happens pretty quickly. And of course that would trigger the next stage in this conflict, because Iran have said that if there is a reprisal, if there is a response from Israel, Iran will respond to that, so that the cycle continues.
And what is the reaction generally among people in Israel to what's going on in Lebanon? Because we keep hearing about how this is increasing support for Netanyahu. Can you just explain a little bit about how this is going down in Israel?
Well, I think undoubtedly, or I say undoubtedly, certainly according to the opinion polls, and lots of them, Benjamin Netanyahu got a real boost in his popularity ratings with this intensified attack on Hezbollah, whether it was the walkie-talkie attack or the pagers exploding, and then the assassination of the former leader of Hezbollah. A lot of people in Israel supported that. I think what is pivotal now is how this ground operation goes. Talking to families here, as we have over the past week or so, there is an expectation that with this new expanded operation, there clearly will be casualties among the military. Now, worth reminding ourselves that in Israel, the public has such a strong bond with the military because of military service people undertake, and then the reservist duties they assume later on in life. They can be called up to help on the front line or elsewhere. We saw 8 Israeli soldiers killed during the week. I think if there is a considerable increase in the number of Israeli casualties, then there might be a public discussion about what happens. There may well be a fall in support for this ground invasion and the ongoing activities of the IDF here. There again, it may only serve to strengthen resolve, with people thinking this absolutely has to be done.
Nick Beek reporting there from northern Israel near to the Lebanese border. Well, Mark Juergensmeyer is a professor in global studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara. I asked him for his assessment of the situation in the Middle East after the events of the past week.
I don't think either Israel or Iran wants a war. And certainly the United States does not want a war this close to the election. And if Israel was directly involved with Iran in a military engagement, the U.S. would have to come to its defense. But I don't think any of the parties want that to happen. But I think mainly Netanyahu's game is a kind of short-term strategy. He wants to degrade the capacity of Hezbollah to militarily attack, just as he's trying to degrade the ability of Hamas to militarily attack. But the problem in doing so, he has to attack at a place where there are a lot of innocent people, because the headquarters of Hezbollah, like Hamas, is surrounded by residences. And so in order to get at the Hamas and Hezbollah leaders, you have to destroy a lot of residences, a lot of people. And this means an enormous amount of suffering. So in the short term, yes, he's degraded their military capacity, but in the long term, the kind of resentment and anger that's created by these attacks will certainly make it more difficult for any kind of negotiated settlement between Israel and its neighbors in the future, both in Palestine and in Lebanon.
But it will want to be seen to be responding. I suppose what you're saying is that it's almost like a balance to not create, to be seen to giving a response to those missile attacks, which it won't let go unpunished, will it? But yeah, equally exactly, not doing anything too big.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, they feel like they have to. Tehran feels like it has to respond, just as Netanyahu feels like he has to respond. But I think in both senses, they want to make sure that they are not going to create a wider war. I think Tehran was quite cognizant that their missile attack, even though 200 missiles are quite a bit when they shot them at Tel Aviv, but the Iron Dome over the territory, they knew would make it possible for most of those missiles not to hit their target. There are places in Israel they could have attacked that are not as secure from the Iron Dome, but they didn't do that. So this seems to me to indicate that Iran wanted to appear to be responding strongly without really provoking an increase in the tension and the increase in the conflict. And I think Israel is going to try to make the same calculation. At least that's what I think it's going to do. Unless for some reason Netanyahu wants to expand the war, maybe this close to the election, he thinks it would be bad for Biden and would increase the chances of Trump getting elected, which would be good for Netanyahu. But I can't imagine that his calculations are quite so narrowly political. I think that his main point is to try to degrade the military capacity of Hezbollah.
Well, you say that. How weakened do you think Hezbollah is then at the moment?
I beg pardon?
How you say the aim was to degrade Hezbollah. How weakened is it at the moment, do you think?
Oh, considerably, both in terms of its military arsenal and also of its key leadership. We don't know yet whether Hashim Safaeddin has been killed, but the top leaders certainly have. The inner circle has been affected enormously. They can be replaced, of course, but not immediately. That's why I say that in the short term, he has made a huge impact on the ability of Hezbollah to respond, just as he's had made a huge impact on Hamas. The problem is the future, because some decades ago, that's exactly what they tried to Israel tried to do in destroying Hezbollah, and that's when Nasrallah came to power by taking out the leader of Hezbollah previously, with the idea that was going to be the end of Hezbollah. That didn't work. The same as with when they tried to when Israel killed Sheikh Yassin, the leader of Hamas, and Dr. Rantisi, his second man. And they thought, that would destroy Hamas. Well, it didn't. It made Hamas even stronger and more entrenched. And my fear is the same thing is going to happen ultimately. Okay. Maybe not immediately, and maybe that's the calculation that Netanyahu is seeking, that if for a couple of months things can be quiet, he can look strong and Israel can appear to be safe. Just in the long run, I think that's not a very healthy strategy.
Professor Mark Juergensmeyer speaking to me earlier. He's from the University of California.